The president can declassify whatever information he wants, but he hasn't about this alleged wiretapping, but he might have about this CIA hack. Elaine, that has some lawmakers concerned not only about what the president alleges that might not be true, but what that he discloses that is.
Credibility matters, certainly. So, Major, the president is standing by his claims, but also is not looking for proof. How sustainable is that?
We're going to find out. I mean, the White House finds itself in what I think can only be described as a precarious position. It keeps saying that there are reports that they looked at, that the president looked at, that substantiate at least some sense of surveillance or eavesdropping or some kind of involvement during the campaign. Yet the bipartisan Senate Intelligence Committee put out a statement that said that didn't happen. Full stop. It didn't happen. And then when the White House briefing occurred and Sean Spicer, speaking on behalf of the president, said he still believes he'll be vindicated and still stands by his remarks and that not everything has been disclosed or communicated to Congress, the Democrat on that Intelligence Committee panel, Mark Warner of Virginia, put out a statement saying, "We would not have made the declaration we did on a bipartisan basis if we did not have a full briefing from all relevant agencies." So those who are being asked by the White House to look into this are rendering a judgment, and the judgment is no, false, didn't happen. Yet the White House, for reasons only it knows, tenaciously holds to this idea that something happened. And the president suggested last night in an interview on Fox that more will come out eventually. But those who are empowered to look and have done something that the White House hasn't done and the president hasn't done, ask the agencies themselves what happened or what didn't happen, have already reached a conclusion. So it's a very narrow and high pedestal the president and those around him are standing on. It's not a particularly credible one, but it's certainly quite visible.
Major, I want to turn to the president's budget proposal. As you well know, he's facing some backlash from both Republicans and Democrats. Senator Marco Rubio, for instance, said he doesn't support proposed State Department cuts, and Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said she can't see how this budget can survive the light of day. Give us some perspective, Major. How typical a reaction is this from both sides of the aisle to a president's budget proposal?
Well, I guess it would be typical of a budget that is silent on revenue, silent on the big drivers of deficits and debts, meaning entitlement spending, and very aggressive about boosting one aspect of the budget, defense spending and homeland security, and cutting almost everything else in ways that even a conservative Republican majority in the House and a conservative Republican majority in the Senate haven't shown a particular appetite to cut at those levels of magnitude. So it's, of course, suspected and predicted and predictable the Democrats would oppose this budget because it cuts deeply into domestic discretionary spending to pay for an increase in defense spending and homeland security, diametrically opposed to what Democrats come to Washington to do. But even Republicans look at the magnitude of these cuts and say, wait a minute, that seems a bit aggressive to us. 29% for the State Department, 31% for the Environmental Protection Agency, almost 14% for the Department of Education, and other cuts involved in this so-called skinny budget, meaning it doesn't deal with revenues, it doesn't deal with entitlements, it's only this one part of Washington spending. And when there's no political history for cuts of this size, you have to ask yourself, can you find that political cooperation, even within your own party? And the early indications for this president are no, he cannot. It may just be an open bid, and the president may be going way, way high and be willing to compromise down just to get some momentum in terms of cutting spending. And if so, we'll have to see how that negotiating ploy plays out. But politically, this is landing with a very conspicuous thud.
So that was going to be my question, Major. Based on your conversations that you've had with folks at the White House, does the White House see this as something of a pragmatic blueprint or merely a starting point for a negotiation, like you just said?
It feels very much like a starting point for a negotiation because there is very little legislative history for cuts of these size to these agencies, even though Republicans rhetorically have been very skeptical of them. And the administration wants to make a case. Look, we're talking about efficiencies, cost savings, collaboration, doing things within the federal government that are outside the box, that are not traditional approaches, and that can be in a way as effective but at less cost. Now, that's a very good rhetorical argument. It may actually have some practical meaning and some practical impact, but members of Congress first have to be persuaded that that's true. Second, that they can politically defend cuts of this size and this magnitude and visibility back in their home districts, and neither of those things have yet happened. So, if the president and his team are really serious about this, they're going to have to make a case-by-case basis to defend all of these cuts. If it's an opening bid and there's room to negotiate, they don't have to go through all that. They'll just have to see what the political capital that they have, how far it carries them on Capitol Hill, and maybe meet somewhere in between. That would be not necessarily a new approach to budgeting, but even so, if the president just got half of these cuts that he has proposed, they'd be the largest by these agencies identified since the Reagan era, and perhaps the president would be willing to live with that.
All right, Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thanks as always.
Sure.